So we will continue the discussion. Today I will just describe a very interesting scene in an ancient Vedic heritage. Two settings I am going to present before you. One, how spiritual seekers, mostly young aspirants, maybe before they enter the life of an household, brahmacharis, the novitiates, so to speak, how they used to come from all over the Indian subcontinent and go to an ancient Vedic hermitage and approach the guru, the teacher, and ask for instruction. This is one. Then I will take up another scene. The first one comes in the Prashna Upanishad. Then in the Mundaka Upanishad, there is a very interesting scene. A very rich man, maybe a billionaire, a famous philanthropist, who has a great reputation, a prominent citizen, a dignitary, a celebrity. Once he gets disgusted with all these worldly pleasures, bank balance, status, position, and so on, in modern times, how he goes to a great sage and asks him the question, what is the supreme knowledge? He is a well-educated man, maybe a PhD from MIT or Harvard, in those days, so to speak. And he has a magnificent job, huge bank balance, a big man of his times. But he feels one day, well, all this fine, but there is something beyond all this. What is that which is wanting, lacking in me, which is essential for me to have a sense of inner fulfillment? And he goes to his sage and asks questions. These are the two contrasting scenes. So in a way you find the picture of the transition of the early Vedic culture to Vedantic way of life, Vedantic culture. The first one comes in the Prashna Upanishad, the first mantra. A group of brahmacharis ask questions, 6 of them, to a great sage. They approach a saint. His name is Pippalada, an ancient Vedic sage, sitting in the forest, hermitage. Some of them are princes, some of them are children of emperors, some of them are mendicants, wanderers. Somehow they happen to converge together in an inn, and there they decide to approach this great sage who was well known for his wisdom and spiritual experience, spiritual attainments. The mantra is this: Om Sukesha cha Bharadvajaha Saibhyascha Satyakama Sauryayani cha Garbhyaha Kausalyascha Ashwalayano Bhargavo Vaidarbhya Kabanthi Katyayana Ste Kaide Brahmavara Brahmanishta Brahmaneshramana Esha Havaitat Sarvam Vakshitidi Teha Samitpanayo Bhagavandam Pippaladam Upasannaha. This is a mantra. Mantra I just repeated, but I shall try to explain. 6 of them. One Sukesha, second one Bharadvaja. So I remember Sukesha is the proper name, and he was the son of Bharadvaja. So he came to be known as Bharadvaja. It is an adjective. So in those days, something very interesting. In those days, you may be addressed with an adjective, your proper name, and along with that an adjective. The adjective will indicate that particular gotra or the particular spiritual lineage to which you belong, or it may indicate your father's name. So Bharadwaja means Bharadwajasya putra, means his son, or Bharadwaja Kulotpanna, somebody who belongs to the Kula or the Gotra or the spiritual lineage, a succession of teachers of Bharadwaja, who is a great Rishi. So Sukesha is one, Satyagama is second, Gargya is third, Kausalya is fourth, Bhargava is fifth, Kabanthi is sixth. You find, if you read the mantra, you find an adjective is added. The adjective only, as I said, indicates maybe the father's name. It could also may indicate the particular Vedic tradition to which they belong, the particular Vedic lineage to which they belong, and so on. You have to remember a society that may have existed perhaps 7000 BC or sometime like that. So they all come to a forest hermitage. Now, what type of people they were, it's also explained. Their Brahmanistha, interesting means, they have studied all other branches of science. In the modern times, some of them were physicists, some of them were architects, grammarians, who has PhDs in philosophy. They studied or taught in Harvard and all that, let us speak. So those people, means they were well established in secular worldly achievement. That's a very important point to remember. Because unless you are able to say no to certain aspects of life, you won't be able to say yes to spiritual inclination, to spiritual path. Sometimes you find even in a very sacred place where all people may be deeply interested in spiritual life, suddenly you find one or two, as you sit in an easy chair, an ant or an insect may bite you. Like that, even in a very sacred place, a little sometimes you find some pricking and ants or insects or cockroaches. Like the human beings also you find. You know the reason? They are not yet ready to say no to the world. If you should be able to say yes to the spirit, you should be able to say no to the world. You can't be both. That's why to be able to say yes and to take the path of the spirit, the spiritual path, you should be able to say no to the other road which takes you in the opposite direction, the reverse direction. Here, so it means they were already fully satisfied, contented in all their worldly achievements and accomplishments. That's why it's a very interesting statement, is the Brahmanistha. Here, Brahmanistha, sometimes if you read, you should know, Brahmanistha literally could mean a person who is established in the contemplation of the absolute reality Brahman. But here the meaning is different. The meaning is they were well established in Aparabrahmanistha. That means Aparabrahma means the relative. All branches of learning, all achievements, all activities other than the highest intuitive inner spiritual experience is Aparabrahma, means secondary knowledge. We will come to that when we discuss the other mantra from the Mundaka Upanishad. Where a highly accomplished householder, a rich man, a philanthropist goes and asks questions to a great sage. So at the same time, they were also deeply interested in the highest spiritual path, leading to the highest spiritual wisdom. So on the one hand, they were well established. They were fully established. They have achieved all that one could dream of achieving in this world. And then they felt a kind of divine discontent. This is enough. That discontent should be divine. In fact, it is a blissful experience. That's something very interesting from a psychological point of view. Suppose you have plenty of money, you have plenty of wealth, everything, and then all these are trash. You feel a kind of discontent, a kind of dissatisfaction. But there is an element of blissfulness associated with this feeling of imperfection. A feeling of imperfection that takes you to higher spiritual life, that comes out of a kind of aversion or indifference towards all these worldly achievements which you want to leave behind. That feeling is not a miserable experience, it is a blissful experience. It's something very interesting. If you want to get a glimpse of it, some of you can visit Vedanta Society during Durga Puja of January 1st, Holy Mother's celebration. You find many of these devotees. Some of them, they take leave from their offices and they'll be doing cooking. They'll be doing, some of them will be cleaning. Some of them maybe in the month of May will be going to Olima and erecting a tent. That's certainly not a very spiritual thing to do from an external point of view. But suppose they were doing it for $100 per hour. Their feeling, their approach towards what they are doing will be totally different. There will be an element of misery. You ask any of these paid people who come, they are wonderful workers, but they are very perfect, very efficient, and they work for $100 per day and they get a huge remuneration, relatively speaking, but there is an element of misery in that. Why? Because they are doing it not for this, not out of the spiritual, the divine discontent. It is not part of a higher quest for a higher spiritual truth. They are doing it out of necessity. Destiny has caught them by the throat and they forces them to do that. But in this case, these people are high-placed professionals who have taken off from their offices. I don't want to name anybody, there are all kinds of people. Right? They'll be busy cleaning the road, putting at the tent, maybe cooking during the puja sessions. You find all this. There is no misery in their face. There is a great joy. I don't think they will have the same joy when they are working in their own homes. Perhaps not. Maybe they will be doing it with a vengeance. They want somebody else to do that. I don't want to go further into the details. But here we find so much of joy. So that's what these people had. See, here you find one word is there, Brahmanishtha, which literally means Abra Brahmopasanayam Nishtha, Pradishthidaha. Thus they are fully established in the relative, non-absolute branches of achievements, learning and so on. And having fully established in their secular learning and achievements, they have said no to that and they are taking a reverse direction. They are going in search of quest for the highest spiritual wisdom. For that they have come to these forest hermitages. That's why it is called, Parabrahma Anveshamana. They are in search of the highest spiritual truth. For that they have come to this hermitage. Then you know what they do? They approach this saint. These people are there. They are not coming empty-handed. They have got a small bundle of twigs, dry twigs, which could be used for lighting fire in the fire sacrifice, which they do every day in forest hermitages. But now there are a few such places, but in ancient times it is a regular practice to start the day with a fire sacrifice, for which they needed thin, dry twigs, small pieces of timber, which should be put in the fire to light the fire. That's what they have brought with them. And this is a kind of offering to the sage. That's the only thing the sage wants, nothing else. And then they approached this great saint. Now, they told him, we have come here to learn the highest spiritual wisdom from you. Now what does this sage do? What does he do? The great sage. Tan hasa rishiruvacha bhuya eva tapasa brahmacharyena sraddhaya samvatsaram samvarchitha yatha kamam prasnan pruchada yadi vijnasyama sarvam kavo vakshyama iti. This is mantra, second mantra. Now the great sage addresses them, tells them, all right, you want to learn? Okay, fine. You can ask whatever questions you want. But before you ask questions, you should get fully qualified to ask those questions. In fact, to be able to ask proper questions and properly, we must think, we must contemplate, we must be able to know, we must learn to ask questions properly. Otherwise, there are many risks. First of all, we won't be asking what we really want to learn. Secondly, even we are told, even if the teacher answers, you will be able to understand it. That's a much more bigger risk. If we are asking a question for which we are not fit or not fully qualified, if we are asking without knowing what we are asking about, then we won't understand, even if the greatest teacher of the world gives a correct answer. There will be a disconnect between the teacher and the student. In fact, wisdom can be transmitted only if there is no gap between the teacher and the student. So how to fill the gap? There is always a wide gap otherwise. So how do we fill the gap? You can imagine, suppose you want to light a candle from a blazing fire. The candle wick and the fire should come together without any gap. If there is 0.1 millimeter gap, the light will not be transmitted from the blazing fire to the candlestick. So they should connect without any gap at all. So how do we fill the gap? By achieving fitness, by becoming qualified, by learning to ask the question properly. We should know what question we are going to ask. And we should be able to ask properly. And then we'll be able to understand when the answer is given. So, the sage doesn't give an abrupt answer. But he says, look here. Bhuya eva tapasa brahmacharyena sraddhaya samvatsaram samvarchata. These 6 youngsters have been living in the forest hermitage in their own places for a long time, observing purity, patience, chastity, concentration, and so on. Ascetic disciplines and so on. That's all right. This practice gave them the wisdom to approach, enabled them to approach the great saint Pippalada. But after reaching the forest hermitage, the sage tells them, once more, for another year, you practice spiritual discipline, purity of life, great concentration, and faith. This faith is very important. Astikya buddhi means sattha. Sometimes I heard some of our friends used to tell, in our schools in this country, in many countries, you are encouraged, you should ask questions. You should not accept anything without questioning. That is a very wonderful thing. But to be able to ask questions, to know what questions we are asking, we should have some discipline. Asking questions for its own sake won't take us anywhere. In fact, to be able to ask questions properly, as I said, we must have internal discipline and external discipline and strong faith. It is strong faith that really transmits information, that transforms information into wisdom. Otherwise, it will be disconnected pieces of information. Even if you read the lives of great scientists, I am here not talking about spiritual teachers, there is no need to say, but even in secular disciplines, great scientists, you find philosophers, see, they must have had tremendous reverence to their teacher and also to the subject that was taught to them. Otherwise, they won't be able to go very far in whatever discipline that they were learning. This is a psychological fact. Suppose you are not really interested in music and strong faith that you want to learn music. It's a grand, sublime branch of learning. And you also have a great respect for a great musician who has spent years and years and decades in constant practice and dedicated learning. Unless you have reverence for that teacher and also reverence for music, you are not going to become a great musician. If you are not interested in it with great concentration, you won't be able to learn the branch. You can just imagine if you catch hold of somebody and forces him to learn music or painting, he will become your enemy and he will also become enemy of music. Whatever we are forced to learn and whatever we are taught by a person whom we have no respect for, we will never be able to learn that branch of learning or excel in that area. So the teacher, that's why in the Gita, towards the end in the 18th chapter, Lord Krishna makes an interesting statement. He says, Idante na tapaskaya na bhaktaya kadachana na cha srushave vakyam inamam abhyasuyati. The meaning is this. Lord Krishna, after teaching all the Gita, Gita is the greatest commentary on the Upanishads. After teaching all this, Lord Krishna makes a statement. He tells Arjuna, don't teach this to anybody. We may think it's a bit rigid, conservative, orthodox, outdated, obsolete way of thinking. We may think it that way, but look at the spiritual sensitivity, to the relevance, the importance of this instruction. Don't teach this to anybody who doesn't have any discipline, who is no self-control, who has no tapa, no concentration, no inner discipline, and who has no respect for the teacher, and who has no respect for the branch of learning, and who hates the teacher. There are many people who learn everything from you and then, oh, that fellow doesn't know anything. And you may write many books after learning from that person. And then you dismiss. When you feel that this is my achievement, I didn't learn anything from anybody. To show that we may even speak in disparaging language about the teacher. I heard recently, I read in an article, it's a terrible, shocking article that I read. I discussed this matter with one of our friends. Sometimes in schools, towards the end of the academic career, mostly in the last year, students feel, well, we have learned so much from this great teacher. For this man, this teacher must have worked hard, taken them for picnics, treated them so well, and if it is California, not for a very high salary, of course, you don't know that. Okay, now, with all that, the students sometimes feel they want to assert their freedom. Psychologically, they feel a kind of inner indebtedness to the teacher, which makes them feel a kind of inner inferiority. Actually, you should be proud that you are indebted to a great teacher. Instead of that, they feel, see, I have learned all this from him, or maybe from her. So I should be thankful, grateful to him. But I don't want to be thankful. I want to assert my freedom. Because I am an independent person. I am not obliged to anybody. I am an independent American, so to speak. So, I want to assert my freedom and independence. The feeling of inner gratefulness the need to be grateful. At the depth of his heart, the student feels a need, desperate need, an obligation to feel obliged, to be grateful. But he doesn't want that, because his other students may tell you, oh, you are so slavish, you respect the teacher. So he wants to assert his freedom. He wants to demonstrate his spirit of independence by being arrogant, by showing arrogance. Maybe this may only for a short time. After, when they grow old, later they may change. But the point is, Lord Krishna makes an interesting statement. You should never take the spiritual wisdom, this spiritual wisdom, to a person who is not fit for it. What is the fitness? It is not color, caste, class, language, slang, or anything. It is inner cultural spiritual fitness. That person should be tapas, he should have inner discipline, inner feel the virtues. He should be truthful, honest, sincere. He should have inner and outer discipline, and he should have a devotion to this shastra, to this branch of learning. You can never excel in any subject unless we have great reverence for that particular branch of learning. You can't have an Einstein unless a person is fully devoted to physics. You can't be a great musician unless you look upon music as something to be respected with reverence. And also, simultaneously, that makes you respectful to the teacher who teaches you that great discipline. That's why it is stated, if we don't have that reverence, whatever may be efforts we put up, that branch of that shastram will not bless you. The music will not bless you. Philosophy will not bless you. If you learn music and philosophy without respect for that branch of learning, and also for the teacher who has the grace to teach you, who takes you by your hand and takes you along the path of wisdom. So, this great sage gives a very wonderful instruction. You stay in this hermitage for 1 year. Practice external and internal discipline, faith and reverence for the teacher and the subjects, and purity, and then whatever questions you feel like asking at the end of 1 year of this practice of discipline, you can ask. But you should not ask before that. Because student knows, if he asks now, whatever the teacher tells him, he will understand. And he will be able to ask the question properly. And then at the end of 1 year, you can imagine the culture of spiritual education, not only spiritual, even in secular education, this was the tradition. You can imagine the psychological depth of the concept. So, athakabanthi ka atyayana upetya papracha bhagavan kutoha ima prajayante. The first question is, I'm not going to the philosophical portion because the topic at hand is not philosophy but the way of life, the values that determine the Vedic society. So, after 1 year, the first of the 6 disciples, young novitiates, brahmacharis, approaches the Guru and asks the question, simple question. You look around, there are mountains, valleys, lakes, trees, animals, human beings, and so on. Where do they come from? This question can be asked by an Aristotle and also by a small baby who is walking along the road holding the hands of his mother. Both of them can ask this question. Because this is a question that's the beginning of philosophical inquiry and also spiritual inquiry. So, and in answer to this question, there are 6 other questions coming from each of these great students, the great sage Pippalada expounds the highest of spiritual philosophy of Vedanta. So this is the first a scene of an ancient Vedic hermitage. Now we are going to another. It comes in the Mundaka Upanishad. I know not that book. So in the Mundaka Upanishad, the scene is slightly different. There, the questioner is a single person. His name is Shaunaka. He's a well-educated man. He is Mahashala. Mahashala. Shala means huge tents, places, inns where this great rich philanthropist used to receive his guests, feed people. He used to run inns, free inns. Let us say motels in modern times, or I don't know, whatever, or places for giving shelter to homeless people and giving them food, everything. So he was well known for his philanthropy and generosity. And one day he approaches Ankira, a great sage, and asks one question. Kasminnu bhagavo vijñāde sarvamidam vijñādam bhavati. This is a question. This is an answer question. Now to understand this question, we must know the whole background. This man, this Shaunaka, was a prominent citizen of the country, extremely well educated, a celebrity, very rich and very generous. So he had already learned all possible sciences. But then he felt that that's not enough. There is a higher truth behind all these branches of learning. What is the higher truth? Because even after learning all this, even after being so rich and powerful and influential, he did not have the inner peace. He felt like going in search of some higher value, higher spiritual wisdom. So he comes to the great sage Ankira and asks the question, what is that by knowing which everything becomes known? In answer to this, the great sage begins his exposition with a beautiful analysis of the very concept of learning and wisdom. He says, Devi 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 Paraja Aparaja. There are two types of learning in this world. The supreme, the higher learning, and the secondary, the relative. It is not inferior, but it is relative. All the great branches of learning that we normally study, with the Vedas, the Bible, the Gita, everything, all that we study and contemplate and think and understand intellectually or philosophize, they are all very good, but they are secondary. What is the ultimate, supreme, primary wisdom? It is inner experience. But without understanding this higher wisdom at the intellectual level, we won't be able to go beyond that and reach the experience level. So he says, the highest truth is inner experience, which is beyond definition, beyond description, and beyond verbalization, as I said yesterday, objectification. So he learns this truth and becomes enlightened. A similar and very famous, interesting episode is found in one of the later books, which is also a great commentary on the highest principles of Vedanta. It is a devotional classic and also a highly philosophical classic. It is called Bhagavata Purana, which was written a little later centuries. There is an interesting scene. It's also a dialogue between a king and a sage. There was a king, an emperor. In fact, he was the emperor of Indian subcontinent at that time. His name was Parikshit. So, He was reputed as a great virtuous king, righteous king, who looked after his subjects properly, who served justice. And in fact, his kingdom was famous, his empire was famous, and he was himself famous as a great emperor. But one day, he was traveling in the forest. In those days, it was the duty of an emperor or a king to see that the wild animals in the forest do not exceed a fixed number, so that they should not become nuisance to the villages near the forest. So he was hunting in the forest. After several days of hunting, he became thirsty and hungry. And then he found a hermitage. And he entered the hermitage. There he found an ancient sage, very old man, sitting completely absorbed in meditation. So he may have made some noise, but the sage did not open his eyes. He was fully absorbed in meditation on God. Now here you can see something happens to the king, the emperor. He was hungry and thirsty. Hunger and thirst sometimes will disturb your balance. So this man, when you become hungry, you become angry sometimes. Now, he became somewhat impatient and angry because he wanted some drinking water. And he made some noise. He should not take the water from the pitcher, with that mud pot, without the host's permission. The sage will not open his eyes. He was fully absorbed in meditation. So what he did, he suddenly lost his balance. So even great men and great women sometimes may lose their balance. And later they repent. There's a greatness between noble people and others. Others will not repent. They have to justify. But people who have a strong spiritual orientation, suddenly they can throw their mind, they can throw a flashlight into their own mind, into the dark corners of their own mind. And they will suddenly realize, oh, I made a mistake. That's the greatness of cultured, noble people, spiritual seekers and others. So this king, what he did, he looked around, and in his anger and despair, he took a dead snake. He raised it with his bow that he was carrying with him, and put it on the neck of the sage. The sage did not know anything, and he went away. The king went away. So this is what happened. For a moment, sometimes we may lose balance, but we can imagine what happens to this emperor. He becomes a great man later. Not because he did this, but because he did something else after this. So he did this act, it could be called a heinous thing to do, taking a dead snake and putting the neck, and he went away. After some time, a small boy returned home. That was the sage's son. You should remember, these sages were all retired householders. Once many of them in those days, when a single child is born, both husband and wife will retire to forest activities. He was such a sage. So after some time, the son, young boy, came. He found his father sitting in deep meditation with a dead snake, a stinking dead snake, hanging on his neck. But this boy had practiced a lot of meditation. He was the son of a sage. So he had an intuition. Sometimes meditation will help you to know a little of this. So the boy understood what happened. He knew somebody had done this. And what he did, he cursed the man who did that. Whoever may have done this, whoever may have done this, that person will die on the 7th day from now. Then he'll be bitten by a snake. That snake there's a famous snake who is supposed to be the king of all snakes, so to speak. Maybe King Cobra or something. Takshaka. So the little boy cursed the man who did this heinous thing, putting a dead snake around the neck of his father. Now, after some time, the sage opened his eyes, and then he knew what had happened. And he was very sorry, he was very much upset. He scolded his little son. You did a terrible thing. You should not have cursed the great king. He was hungry and thirsty. So he did this. Certainly it was a heinous thing to do. But he was a noble king. Otherwise, accepting this terrible thing that he did, he was well known as a noble, virtuous ruler and emperor. Now you have cursed him. The curse will certainly happen. It won't go in vain. So he sent his other disciples to the emperor Parikshit, informing him of the curse on his life. So Parikshit, the emperor, suddenly realized he did a terrible thing. And you know what he did? He said, I deserve this. I did something terribly wrong. I should never have done insult to a great saint. So he was very much repentant, and he was very much upset, and he sent apologies to the sage and also the little son, little boy who cursed him. And then you know what he did? He called his eldest son and made him his successor. And whatever personal wealth he had that didn't belong to the kingdom, he distributed among others, needy people. Then as a mendicant, he left his palace, left behind his kingdom, his comforts, his power, everything, his wealth, everything. And he comes to the bank of Ganga. Ganga is a holy river in those days. Certainly it was not a polluted river in those days as it is now. It was holy, pure river. You have to remember, maybe 9,000 years back. So he came to the banks of Ganga. It's a holy river. And this news spread like wildfire. So great philosophers, wise men, wise women, saints and sages of those times heard of this news. They were surprised that this king, instead of getting angry, he felt, well, I have only 7 days to live. What was the curse? The little boy had cursed him. Well, for the heinous crime that he did against my father, this man, whoever may be this person who has done this, putting the snake around the neck of his father, he will die on the 7th day from now. So the king knew that he had only 7 days to live. 7 into 24 hours. So what will normally common people do? Suppose they are told suddenly they have only 1 week to live. They may suddenly lose their balance, get terribly upset. Or they may withdraw all the bank from the money and go to Las Vegas or something. Or they may suddenly become unbalanced. And of course there are great men and women even now who can think of the beyond. How does it come? How does this wisdom come? Even if you have only 7 days to live, this is not a big problem. How does this wisdom come? Technically it comes from the conviction that these 7 days is not the end of my journey. This life is not a thing that begins with your birth in a hospital or maybe and with your death in a crematorium. So life is not a journey, not a linear progression that begins with birth and ends with death. Death is not a full stop. Death is only a comma or a semicolon. The journey continues. If you do good things in this world, that creates a tremendous spiritual wealth for him, and that will be a great help for you. We discussed yesterday, with the help of a verse in the Gita. Whatever we do, it creates a vritti, an impression, The vritti creates a samskara. The samskara creates a vasana. Vasana becomes a sankalpa. Sankalpa again leads to the repetition of action. To put in English, whatever we do, you find, it creates an impact, it registers, and it is an influence. It creates a kind of, it leaves a mark in our mind. If we do something noble, we will have a tendency to do that again. If the result of what we do is unpleasant, we may try to avoid it. If it is very pleasant, we may try to do it even if that is not necessary. So this is a kind of vritti. Now this vritti is called impression or modification. The vritti becomes a samskara. Samskara is nothing but an impression with a strong orientation towards action, repetition or avoiding. If the result of what we do is unpleasant, we try to avoid that action. If it is pleasant, we may try to repeat it. So it becomes a samskara, tendency. Samskara again becomes a vasana, which is a natural intuitive tendency to do certain things. You find, if you are teachers in schools, you find children with different inborn tendencies, aptitudes, skills, which they perhaps have brought with them from previous life. And this may again prompt you to take a decision to act in a certain manner. So it is sankalpa, and that leads to action. Action again produces, the cycle continues. So if you do good things, what happens, we are unconsciously building up a tremendous spiritual capital that remains in our account. So even if you die, after that, in the next life, whether you like it or not, we'll be drawing checks on the strength of that account, that spiritual capital that you built up in this life. The spiritual capital that comes out of meritorious deeds, good actions, good thoughts, good ideas, and so on. So Parikshit knew this, so he was not desperate. In fact, despair comes from one strong feeling: I am going to lose everything. I am going to merge into nothingness, into void. So I will be nothing after death. Parikshit knew that he had done his best as a king to do his duty, to perform his responsibilities. This he did, of course, and as a result he got a punishment, and he was not worried. He was not worried. He was repentant, and he also said that he deserved it. Now this wisdom made him a great philosopher. So when he reached the bank of Ganga, as I said, the news spread. Number of saints and philosophers and kings, and they all came to the banks of Ganga to meet this wise emperor. At that time, the king puts one question to the greatest of the sages who had assembled on the banks of Ganga. The question is this: Ata prichami samsiddhim yoginam paramam gurum purusha seha yatkaryam mriyamanasya sarvata. This is a question. That comes at the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, the first book we find. The question is simple. In fact, the whole text is an answer. Huge book is an answer to this question. What should a dying man do? What should a person on whose death is staring, death is looking at him, what should such a person do? And then he continues, how should he meditate, whom he should meditate upon, what all disciplines he should follow, and how he should live. And again, what he should not do. So what he should do and what he should not do. These are the questions that Parikshit put to the greatest sage who has assembled. His name was Shuka. Shuka is the great philosopher, saint of ancient times. In answer to this question, the great sage Shuka uh, preaches the whole philosophy, the whole devotional philosophy and spiritual philosophy of Bhagavata Purana, which is a famous book. I shall give in a nutshell his answer, which comes in the 6th verse of the first chapter of the second book, means Dutiya Skandha, second book of the text. There, the answer is given. In fact, it contains the essence of Vedantic way of life. So he says, you should live your life in such a way that you should be able to leave this world at the time of dying with a smile on your face and remembering God's name and God's form. So, either you practice Edavat Jnana Yogabhyam Swadharma Parinishthaya Janma Labha Parapumsam Ante Narayanasmurti. This is the answer, the verse, 6th verse of the first chapter, the second skandha. So the great sage tells him, you may analyze what is behind this whole creation. That will take you to the highest spiritual realization. If you do that with great concentration and reverence. That is Jnana Yoga. Or you may control your mind. You can practice Ashtanga Yoga as Patanjali prescribes. You can meditate on absolute reality. You can control your senses and mind. That's another path. Or you do whatever you have to do, your duty, with total non-attachment. Giving the result of whatever you do to God. Offering the result of whatever you do to God, if you believe in God. Or you offer it for the welfare of the world at large, as Buddha did. Karma Yoga. So, through any of these paths, if you can somehow transcend the empirical, if you can look beyond the present, beyond the empirical, beyond the phenomenal world, we can think of the absolute reality. Know what religion you belong to, or if you do not belong to any religion, then also, if you do all your work with total unselfishness and non-attachment and offer the welfare of God, then you will be able to leave this world with a smile. Ante Narayanasmurti. Means at the time of leaving this world, you should be able to think of God. You should be able to remember God. This is the simple answer. Of course, the whole Bhagavata is a tremendous, deep explanation of the highest spiritual philosophy and the highest devotion. Now, here you can see different approaches. On the one hand, you can find in a forest hermitage 6 young boys. Of course, many of them are not boys, young men who are fully qualified, who are fully established, approach a great saint and request him to teach them the highest spiritual truth. And in response to that, Pipalada tells them, you stay in this forest hermitage, lead a disciplined life with proper concentration and meditation, and then after you are ready, at the end of the year, whatever questions naturally occur in your mind, you can ask. And in his total humility, the sage doesn't tell him, you ask me whatever you want, I shall answer. No. Yadi vijnasyamaha sarvam khavo vakshyamai. You can ask, if I know, I shall answer. That's the answer given by the sage. In the second scene in the ancient forest hermitage, a fully accomplished person, an householder, a big celebrity, a big man of the society, he comes to a great sage, Angira, and he feels that though he is a very learned person, whatever he had learned had not made him spiritually wise. So he asked the great sage to teach him the supreme knowledge, by knowing which everything becomes known. In the third instance, you find that's a very touching incident. A great emperor, a great king, he is made wiser. He becomes a philosopher. He becomes an intense seeker of spiritual truth when he is under a curse. And even he knew that he had only 7 days to live. Suddenly he realizes the perishable nature of his own kingdom, the empire, confers, wealth, everything. And as a mendicant, he leaves his home behind and goes to the banks of Ganga and sits there in meditation for 7 days. He knew that at the end of the 7th day, somehow, even if he tries hard, a big snake is going to bite him and he is going to die. It really happens. What happened? The story, the second part of the story is not very intimately related to the topic at hand. His ministers, soldiers, all the efficient administrative hierarchy, they all made wonderful arrangements. So no one, not even snake, no one can approach him. So he was, according to one story, one version, he put up a huge tower and he lived at the top story of the tower. What happened the 7th day? Nothing could ever reach him. Finally, the snake god, so to speak, took the form of a sage, a Brahmin, a philosopher, and went to him, and that was the end of his life. And now the point is this: he was not bothered. So you can imagine how, of course, there is a tragedy here in the third version, the third story. But for Parikshit, it was not a tragedy. For others, it was a tragedy. For the man who was going to die, it was not a tragedy. So you can imagine that comprehensiveness of Vedanta. A real philosophy of life should also teach us how to die as a wise man. That is the greatness of the third narrative. Now you can ask questions behind the action. Now we'll have, I think, almost, yes, exactly 30 minutes we have, friends.
Swamiji,
Ah.
I know that you've given us some tips on how to ask questions to refresh your time. But I guess in the vein of some of the questions that we heard about, so on Monday, or Sunday, we were returning back to school, doing research, teaching, doing all this stuff. And so today's Thursday, it's a few more days. It's not like I'm going to die after those days. At least hopefully not.
Yeah.
But what can we do to make the best of our time at the spiritual retreat for these few days?
Yes, a teacher should do his best to teach and to do his duty as a teacher. And then he should also remember he has another dimension. He has a spiritual dimension, a spiritual journey to make. For that, for the beginning, whenever you get time, reading some of these books could help you. Because a person who is busy as a teacher, after the teaching work is done, a little time we must spend to look and to think beyond, to think about our own life, our own personality, and to think that spiritual dimension of our life. Because that will help you another way. Even if you have a problem in teaching or in a job, that will help you to solve the problem, to approach the problem from a higher angle. When our eyes are fixed on a higher level, then we will be able to deal with the lower problems at the lower level with a balance and poise. Otherwise, we'll be completely immersed in that. We may lose our balance when we become completely obsessed with the immediate problems. So, to establish a link to higher, that takes us to a higher spiritual idea. Even from a psychological point of view, it's very helpful. Because all people have to face problems, not necessarily, but some inconveniences, let us speak. Inconveniences naturally happen. We'll be able to solve all of them, and we'll be able to understand they all belong to the relative plane. They are natural, and nothing in this relative plane can be perfect. So, our mind will extend and get linked to a higher dimension of life when we keep these ideas in mind. And then continue reading or attending such programs, lectures or retreats. This is one way of establishing a link to a higher spiritual idea. That's the only way. Right now we should not think that we are going to get an experience. First, we must make our mind ready. For that, we have to put these things together. On the one hand, my duty, my profession, my responsibilities and so on. On the other hand, there's a deeper dimension to my life and personality, that is spiritual. Even if you do not reach that experience level immediately, still when you are linked to that higher ideal, you'll be able to look and approach the profession, duties and responsibilities in a more mature manner. That's a practical benefit.
Swami, I think another part of Peter's question was, how do we best use these days here, right now?
In the
Right
retreat.
here in Tavo.
Did you read that?
Well, I was happy with this answer.
I know. If you have that in mind, I think we are all making the best use of the time available. We are making the best use of time available. So, whatever books you find, you read, whatever you read for the evening at 8 o'clock, similar things you find in other books, complete books in other books. So somehow, even intellectually, because as a teacher, it's natural to you to intellectually establish a link to some higher idea. Even from a psychological point of view, which is very healthy. It saves you a lot of trouble. Which otherwise, you may get completely immersed in the small problems. We will be able to look upon small problems as small problems when our mind is linked to a higher idea. Otherwise, every small problem will be a huge, big problem. That's the thing. You find many people I have seen, many responsibilities, duties, everything, but they look upon them as natural, as part of the game of life. That's because they try to link their mind to a higher idea. That's a practical benefit. Somebody, Christopher wanted to raise some questions?
Oh, I don't know. I think Peter's question was just marvelous, and I was thinking a little bit about that too. I'm going back at noon today, and I've been here 4.5 days, and
Yeah.
I think each day we have all felt a sense of the divine, either through hearing your classes in the morning and also through the
Readings,
the readings
discussions,
at night,
yes.
the discussion.
Somehow if we can feed our mind with some healthy food,
Yes, exactly. And also to know
that's the
that-
one practical benefit.
Yes, and then also to know that that has become a part of us.
Yes.
It's not, you stressed at the beginning that we need to go inside. We need to go into the internal with what we are learning. And I think that that has happened, that these great spiritual truths have such a tremendous impact. And we can't lose them. They're going to stay with us, and we're going to take them back, as you say, and then relate them to our challenges and trials and experiences. And they will be with us.
Yes.
They can't go
Yeah.
anywhere. Anyway, that just sort
The,
of struck
true,
me.
true, true, true. The very practical level, if we do not have a higher ideal in life, what happens? We look upon every small, petty, natural, unavoidable problem as a very big problem. It's unavoidable. So long as we live in this world, and the world can never be perfect. The world can never be perfect. This planet is not inhabited by 8 billion spiritual seekers. No. So you find a mathematical perfection or precision is impossible in terms of values in this relative world. So frequently what happens, those who do not have a higher value, they look upon every small, little, inevitable, unavoidable problem as a very big crisis and dilemma. And they lose the sleep, they become depressed. On the other hand, the other end, people who have linked themselves to a higher ideal, they are able to look upon really serious problems as part of the game of life. So, that's the real benefit of spirituality. That's the Vedantic way of life. So after all, I don't think any of us will have such a serious problem as Parikshit that king himself had.
Swami, I read an interesting thing this morning. It was about the mantra and
Mantra.
and the definition of mantra was a protector of your mind. That it was like the rails that a train stays on, that will keep us on track.
Yes, that's true. Trayate means Marana Trayate mantras. Mantra is something that saves you, protects you, and also that helps you through contemplation. Manana means contemplation. So through contemplation, your mantra becomes a great protector. Because what happens, even unconsciously, if your mind is dwelling on mantra and its meaning, it slowly goes deeper, and it slowly influences our attitudes, thought patterns, everything. As I said, that's why I said the morning, the difference between a spiritual seeker who practices mantra and other prayer, whatever may be, and others is, those who do this, they are sometimes able to throw the flashlight into the dark corners of their own mind. And slowly this mantra becomes a kind of inner, that machine that keep the ship in one direction. What's that? Rudder. Yeah? Yes.
Oh, the rudder?
Yeah. It kind of, in a way, more like GPS system that takes you to a higher goal. That's what happens. So that's an advantage of great, spiritual seekers. Others will never turn the flashlight into their own mind. they try to throw the flashlight into other people's minds. Which means that they themselves do not make much progress. In fact, that comes, the mantra has got manana. Manana means contemplation. That's one meaning, one aspect of meaning. Manana, that you contemplate. As you contemplate, suddenly some of the dark corners of our own mind get lighted. That's what happens. And that's why, as I said, you find many spiritual seekers who practice in their own way, they are able to feel at least once a while kind of inner joy and blissfulness within, which others frequently do not get.
So, Swami, you began the session by elaborating that first, before you can say yes to spiritual practice, you have to say no to worldly existence. Now, you just said we will probably not experience things like parikshit, but how are we to know? I mean, how are we to know that we have only a certain amount of time to live, and that is of the essence? I mean, how does that come?
I think we need not worry about our lifespan, and the main point is, as I said, we should be able to say no to the world of flesh, or to the world of matter, so to speak, the world of okay, and say yes to the path leading to the spiritual realization. Now the point is, our statement no to the world may become complete only in slow decrease. See, Swami Vivekananda made a statement, you may remember 2-3 days back. A strong man of willpower can stand up and say no, and it just happens. Okay, now, for ordinary spiritual seekers, they're practicing renunciation, they're practicing non-attachment, they're practicing all these great spiritual values. But they may not be fully established the way such a person of strong will. Swami Vivekananda made a statement, Buddha is the example given by him. So in the case of spiritual seekers, frequently this process of saying no to the world of matter, it goes on, and it becomes more and more complete as we intensify our statement yes to the path of the spirit. As we increase our spiritual practices in intensity and in seriousness, we become more and more focused on the path of the spiritual life. So it doesn't happen all of a sudden. It doesn't happen. But slowly our mind gets colored by spiritual ideas. And to that extent, it leaves behind the world of matter. This doesn't happen all of a sudden. There are 4 disciplines which Shankaracharya elaborates in the Viveka-Chudamani. First, we must be able to discriminate, that word is used. I mean, with a discerning mind, we should be able to decide what is real and what is unreal. Now, our concept of the real depends upon our own spiritual evolution. Our concept of unreal also depends upon where we stand. But if you make a beginning, slowly you are able to progress further and further. And again, the second discipline of renunciation. Renunciation of pleasures in this world and hereafter. That renunciation also slowly gets more and more intense as we become more and more focused on this ideal of renunciation. So there is a gradual evolution even in the process of leaving the world of matter behind and taking to the path leading the spirit. Even in that there is a gradual evolution. As I said, we have inherited, we have brought with them a chittam, a mind stuff, which is full of all types of impressions, samskaras, tendencies and so on. Some of them are very good, some of them may not be very good. Sometimes, even when we are sincerely trying, a tendency to little mischief, mind may be playing that. And you know why it happens? Because along with good samskaras, which brought us here, there are also some disturbing samskaras which drag us in the opposite direction. So, but as we proceed further and further, the disturbing samskaras get weakened and the positive, helpful, spiritual tendencies become strong. That's why even when we are listening to spiritual truth, we are meditating or praying or whatever we are doing, sometimes the mind flies, moves in another direction. And then of course mind returns. That's because we are making an attempt. Which means there is one bundle of samskaras, impressions, which are very good. Because we have done this in the past, maybe in this life or previous life. So that helps us to sit and focus on these spiritual things. But people may also have done something else which may not be conducive or helpful to spiritual life. So that distracts the mind and takes the mind away from our main spiritual focus. And that may manifest in the form of disturbing thought currents, disturbing tendencies. So, as I said, sitting in an easy chair in the cushion, an ant may bite us. So like that, somewhere in the dark corners of the mind, there may be some disturbing samskaras, tendencies that may have crept into our mind stuff. But they will get weakened as we move further and further. That's why constant reading, discussion, all these help us to reinforce the positive, helpful tendencies and weaken the unhelpful ones. That's the real purpose of spiritual life. That's why we feel this inner blissfulness or contentment in direct proportion to the weakening of negative samskaras. As we get more and more enriched by positive, helpful, spiritual tendencies, more and more contentment and peace, inner peace. So also the other way around.
Swamiji, when Thakur says that you have to develop purity of mind, right? So that has to come, with all this, negating, saying no to all these negative tendencies, right? And it happens not in a flash.
Yeah, slowly.
It takes a longer discipline to do that.
Yes. That's why Sri Ramakrishna, if you read the Gospel, you find he never disturbs anybody's mental equilibrium. Sometimes some youngsters came to him and he knew that they were highly accomplished in spiritual life. He could see that they had practiced a lot of spiritual, meditation, other spiritual practice in previous life. But they didn't show that. They asked him questions. They asked him disturbing questions. But he knew it is only the surface. And he talked to them about the highest spiritual truth, renunciation, and so on. But sometimes some merchants came to him. In fact, Marwari merchants came to him. Calcutta, financial business life is still dominated by the Marwari business community, very prominent people. They were good people. They were very charitable. They will build huge temples. They will pay big donations, but make plenty of profit also. So now, when they came, Sri Ramakrishna never told them about the highest spiritual truth or renunciation. What he told them, you once a while in this busy life of you businessman, once a while you go to a temple, a place of contemplation, or go to a holy person and sit and meditate, think of God. If you can't go out to a holy place, see, in your own home we can sit and think of these things. He never asked them to close their shop and go to the forest. Never. He knew that if I told them, they won't do that. They won't come again. So what he did, he gave them only a small dose of spiritual instruction, and that worked. Many of them became very, you find many of them very helpful, but they are businessmen. If you tell them about the highest spiritual truth, they may not digest, they may not welcome. They know on the surface it is not of much practical use to them. But if you tell them, you are running business very good, but once in a while do some good things also. So that's what the great philanthropists in business, the captains of industry in America, as I said earlier, big businessmen, big captains of industry, they spend a lot of money, they acquire a lot of money, they spend a lot of money for high philanthropical activities to fight AIDS, Ebola and all this in the sub-Saharan countries, backward nations. They do. That's what Sri Ramakrishna told businessmen to do. So where we stand, there we begin. The highest mental purity is alright, but that may not be the right message for a person at the moment. When you talk to a primary school student, you have to talk to him, you have to explain to him what he can learn depending upon what he has already learned in the previous class. Not what he is going to learn after several years in Harvard. So, the point is, mental purity is true, but the highest mental purity is possible only at a higher level. We have to remember one point, in spiritual life, it is not a matter of our choice. It's a matter of where we stand and how far we have evolved. So you cannot complain against anybody. Nobody is wrong, because every person is trying to observe, understand and practice this universal spiritual message according to his or her own level of evolution. So nobody is wrong. In Sri Ramakrishna's life, there was one man sitting next to him. He was a Hazra. He was a very shrewd person. He used to take the name of God with a big Rudraksha beard and all that. He also used to do some little business also in his own way. And he used to tell people, you come here, and he wanted rich men to go to him and give him some donation. And also he spread a huge tiger skin and sat there with the big Rudraksha. And Sri Ramakrishna told him, even he has some good qualities. After all, he didn't do anything else. He came to the temple, sat on the veranda, and sat next to Sri Ramakrishna, little in the next room, and he was not doing anything. He was not counterfeiting notes or black market, nothing. What he did, he pretended to be a spiritual person. That may perhaps take him to genuine spirituality later life. In the process, he did some genuine spiritual practice. So Sri Ramakrishna, all right, he also has a place. So, but he used to scold him also. But sometimes he used to help him in his own way. So, spiritual, it is, as I said, yesterday, I mentioned earlier, day for yesterday, there are 4 levels of spiritual seekers. Artho, Jijnasa, Artharthi, Jnani. Means, there are those who are in need of something, sick, they want to be cured. And there are people who are poor, they want some money, nothing wrong in it. Pray to God. After all, instead of praying to anybody else, you pray to God. So that way, of course, it is not the highest form of spirituality or devotion, but it is some primitive form. Even primitive form takes you some distance. So, and Ramanuja says, even if you start as a devotee who prays to God for some material benefits, though you do not belong to the category of the highest devotees, it's a very low level, still gradually you will evolve to a higher level. When you pray to God for something, when God listens to your prayers, and when you find your prayers are answered, your problems are solved, then out of gratitude, you will start praying to God without any selfish motive. You mean it's a higher spiritual wisdom. This may not happen to everyone, of course, that's true. You heard of the story, the other side, with everything. a person pray to God, well, if I get $1,000, I will donate $500 to the church. And as he was walking in the street, he found a wallet lying there, and he found in it $500. So God, you have taken your share already. So I not give you. So instead of giving $250 to the church, he said, God, you have already taken your share. So I need not give you anymore. So sometimes we play games. Of course, there is no end to that. But we are talking about mainstream spirituality. That's the idea. That's it. So, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om, that's it. Sri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu.